The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to AmericanSchismBook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Zyra Prasada. Hello, Zyra. How are you?
Well, thank you. How are you?
Thank you for coming on the show. Are you promoting a book?
I am. I recently released my first poetry book, Qurban, A Poet's Liberation, and it's been a fantastic release so far. Okay.
Why don't you tell us a little about it, and maybe... if you like, I don't want to put you on the spot, but maybe you could read something from the book.
Oh, absolutely. So a little bit about the book. In the poetry space right now, there are fantastic poets that bring a lot of their personality and experiences to the table. And I've been trained classically in poetry across various disciplines like metaphysical poetry, transcendentalism, and beat poetry, but something that I haven't seen as often is a mix of those traditions as an American with the traditions of my lineage. I'm from India and Pakistan as well. My parents are from there, and so it's a part of my heritage. And that tradition, at least Islamic poetry and also poetry from South Asia, includes ghazal, among other forms. And I put a lot of those forms, those schools together into one. So that is exactly what this book has become. It's a mix of traditions in form, in style, and in word.
Now, I don't know that much about poetry, but I've had several poets on this show. And when I was growing up, poetry always had to rhyme. But I'm finding more people that have written poetry that doesn't rhyme now. So is that no longer a rule for it to be a poem, that it has to rhyme?
Yeah, that's not a rule. You know, what's funny is that we're taught that it must rhyme, or we're taught the let's just say the fantastic form of haiku, 5, 7, 5 in syllables. We remember certain things that poetry does, but what we don't remember are the things that maybe Shakespeare had done, meter, right? Something that we remember in high school, or that our memories would be jogged by if we listen to it. Some other things we don't really get taught are the fantastic works of free verse poets who don't rhyme. They just go. And when they go, they take you on a journey. And you forget about the need for rhyme. You forget about the need for form. You just are there on the journey. So poetry is very free. There's so many different forms, and sometimes it doesn't have to have one.
Okay, so how would you distinguish between a non-rhyming poem and a short story?
A short story, well, you know, we can get into poetry, prose, short story. A poem is a short form. It can also be a long form. If you've ever read Dante's Inferno, you're seeing something that's a narrative. So a short story instead has a specific block text-like fashion. It has a lot of interplay between characters. It has a narrative arc. You might find bits of those throughout poetry housed within, but I think the form can be distinguished by sight primarily. And then secondly, if you're familiar with a lot of short stories, there's this denouement. There's this finality of sorts in a short story, depending on how you define that. In poetry, sure, you might reach it, but you might reach it in less pages, with less of a narrative arc, and a lot less, let's just say, a lot less character development. How about?
Okay, so poetry might be more akin to song lyrics.
Song lyrics, very much could be poetry as well.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm just thinking because I would guess that poetry, you would really need to maximize every word in the sentence to pick the sort of best words to use, economy of words, if you will. Where in a story, you can kind of be really drawn out and long and a lot of detail. I think in poetry, you wouldn't probably do that, right?
You're absolutely right. And poetry is distinguishable because it's not made of paragraphs, it's made of verses, stanzas. You might see those in those blocks. Whereas short stories, just as you said, that plus they're recognizable sentences. They're following grammatical rules. They're organized into paragraphs. So we're going away with that in poetry, but we're still bringing you on a journey.
So how much...
Just like songwriting.
Yeah, this is an interesting idea. How much of writing is mathematical, akin to music theory, as opposed to just free-flowing creative ideas coming out of somebody? It's both, right?
It's both. It's both in ways that, let's say there's so many disciplines of music. Let's say you look at Western classical music. You have sheet music, and you have also time. But then you have the creativity of sound, and you can utilize time, you can utilize the form, though it's written, and still add yourself to it. And suddenly, all of that becomes something else throughout time. So we've moved from classical all the way down to the likes of rock and hip hop, etc. But everything can still be written on a sheet. However, the renditions people create, the ways that people express it, and even in the creation itself, there's a person there. And that is exactly what writing is as well. It can be mathematical. It can be meter, meaning we can have stressed syllables, so there's still sound. And we can have some syllables that don't really stress as others do, and that's called meter. We can break up text. We can break up text in lines where your thought just drops off the page for a moment and comes back on the next line. And all of a sudden your mind is thinking in different colors, or you're hearing different sounds emoted by your memories. So all of that can happen through form, and sometimes it doesn't have to, just like in music.
Yeah, it's very interesting because people that I know who are tremendously creative have more difficulty sometimes with the structures. Like I know a lot of musicians, as an example, I know a lot of musicians who hate music theory, who failed it in school. I was one of those, who just didn't get it as a necessary tool to write songs. But we can write pretty good songs without it, just because we can sort of hear how the song goes together. And in the end, it works and people like it. On the other hand, I've interviewed people who are masters at music theory who have suggested that it's a tool, that it gives you, it's like a roadmap that shows you where you can go with the song, where the non-music theory person has to do it by trial and error. So it's much slower of a process.
Yes, everything you learn is a tool.
Yeah.
Plus, our predecessors, everything that comes from tradition, the humans before us have all taught us invaluable lessons, and they've codified it in some way. And we don't have to learn it to the T, to the book, to perfection. Just by recognizing it, we've escaped trial and error. Same way we can think about let's say, modern medicine of sorts. I mean, you would know what to eat or what not to eat outside in the woods had you read the books about it as well. So we are our history, and it's a tool. It's always just a tool.
Well, that's true. And also, the great songwriters and the great writers in the world probably didn't write their best work the first time out. They got better as they went along. Now, whether they learned through trial and error or whether they learned through studying music theory or studying the structure of writing, as we were talking about before, we don't know. But, I mean, most authors that I've interviewed said that their first work was really bad, but they got better because they kept practicing. And I think that holds true for music and for any of it.
How relative that is as well to the creator. As a creator, I can tell you anything I write, I don't ever think this is fantastic. I don't ever, if I look back at certain things over the course of time, I can see that the skills have changed because of how much I've learned. So this is a testament to dedication. However, even as I write things now, there's always somewhere more to go, and I can feel it. So I don't think I can ever say there's a best work. I don't know if the day I pass, if anyone were to ever read it, it would be their subjective interpretation of best, because I can tell you honestly from myself, maybe one of my best would not be considered the best, just because of how it made me feel.
Well, that's true, and I don't think one really can judge another person's best until they stop. Mm. It's easy to look back on a group like the Beatles, for example, and then we can argue about which one was their best album. Then that's subjective. That's just up to personal opinion. But if they were still an active group that was still writing and creating music, then I don't think you could do that. You could say, well, the best one so far, but to really judge somebody's best, I think they have to be finished with whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah, I guess you need a final compendium of work. I'll tell you when I think I've done something really well in writing, I feel as though everything has left me. What I mean by that is, I'm learning the discipline of South Asian classical music. Not at all proficient in it, but I'm learning how to play sitar. And there are so many intersections across all of the arts. I also was trained in acting and continue to train in acting. So I really do play around with all of the arts on this journey of life. And all of us always say that there is this moment you reach where you don't recognize what's happening and you're just doing. And you are exhausted by the end of doing. It's just as if your soul leaves you. Some people will have that during performances. I have that when I write certain pieces, when I feel as though my emotional state is so heavy in me, and so I just have to write. And it doesn't matter what comes out, but when it all comes out, even though it might look like a mess, it is what it is, and I'm exhausted and might as well sleep. And I can clean it up the day after, what have you. But I would find that is my best work when there's nothing left to say. Everything is gone, just as musicians feel, or actors. There's nothing we could have done more. Everything is gone.
Well, I think ultimately you have to be happy with it first before you put it out. And then once you put it out, hopefully somebody else likes it.
I'll tell you, that's a personal journey. I was sitting there with Lucid House Publishing with this book for almost a year plus, and every time I looked back at each piece, I was like, I could change something here. I can still do it. And I had to get to a point where I said, no, just let it stand. Who knows what pure happiness is? When you return to things, you're a new person. And then it's like, how do you give this to somebody? I'm not that person anymore.
Well, it's true. And I know that for songwriters and for filmmakers and things, when they watch their quote-unquote finished product, they always find something. There's always some nitpicky thing that, I should have had this done. I should have changed this, should have changed. But, at some point you just got to say, that's it. It's done. Moving on. And and you just have to, that's a self-doubt thing that comes in, which is good and bad. I mean, as long as you can control it and manage it. If it gets to be too overwhelming, you'll never get anything done. But if you don't do it enough, then you might not get it quite the way it should be. Okay, we are kind of running down on time. Do you want to read something from your poetry book? Do you have a short one?
I do. How about I read the first one? It's titled The Magnificent. I wanted to open the book with this because it's empowering. So much of this book is about a lot of what's happening in the social and political spaces today. So much of it is also based on the pandemic, a lot of other things about my lineage, my history. But the very first one opens up with who I am right now. And I do think it's a fantastic piece, so I'll leave with that.
Okay.
The Magnificent. I am the beginning of every end, the evolution of revolutions in becoming. I am matter born from matter, the universe in every breath, the ancestors of the soil, the greatness of Mother Earth reproduced. I am everlasting. I am forever breathing in the lines that paint my face, in the grays that grace my name, through the body to be debris for the green that follows the light. I am the word. I am the stone against the monsoons, consuming tides and crashing winds, while the earth, tilted on its very own axis, bows to the creators of the energy that is within me. I am the magnificent.
That was the end, right? I wanted to make sure that wasn't just a long theatrical pause. Okay.
That was it.
Oh, that was very good. Yeah, I enjoyed that. All right, great. And what is the title of your book again?
Qurban. Qurban. Qurban means a martyr, a sacrifice.
Okay, great. Well, we do have to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming on. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Sure. Right now, my book is, my bio is on Lucid House Publishing, and my book is pretty much sold everywhere on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's. Website is soon to come. Soon to come.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. It was nice meeting you and nice talking to you. Best of luck.
Thank you so much, Douglas. Thank you as well. And it was wonderful being here.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Edward Willett. Hey, Ed, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on again.
Let's see, you were on, when were you on last?
Back in the fall, I think, if I remember right.
Okay, all right. Do you remember what we talked about?
No.
Yeah, me either. And I do so many that, and I know you do a lot of interviews as well, so they kind of all get lost in the blur,
I'm sure we were brilliant, though, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure we were. So this time around, you got a new book called Star Song and also an anthology to promote. Tell us a little about the new book first.
Well, Star Song is something that's been near and dear to me for a long time. Way back in the 1980s when I started writing, one of the earliest short stories I sold was a science fiction story called The Minstrel. And it was a little teen story with a teenage protagonist. It appeared in a teen magazine here in Canada called Jam, long gone now. And almost right away I thought, there's a kernel of a novel there. This could be a scene from a longer book. And so it was also one of the first novels that I wrote and tried to get published early part of my career. And I came very close to it. Back then it was still called The Minstrel, the novel was. And I had sent it, this would have been in the early 90s, I guess, very early 90s. I had sent it to Walker and Company, which was a pretty good-sized young adult children's publisher. And Josefa Sherman, who was quite a well-known name in the science fiction world, was the editor there. And she sent it back. She said, I like this, but there's a big gap in the middle. You need to fill that in and do some other things. And if you do, I'll take another look at it. So I did all that. I sent it back to her. And she sent me a message. Well, it wasn't an email back then. It was an actual letter that said, you did exactly what I wanted you to do, and I was ready to make an offer on it. But the publisher died, and his son took over and decreed that they weren't going to publish science fiction anymore. So my novel, which did not get published back then, but would have launched my career a few years before I actually sold anything else, never found a home after that, even though it came so close to being published by a fairly major publisher. So, fast forward a great many years and a great many books and a whole lot of writing. And a couple of years ago, I started my own publishing company, Shadowpaw Press. And I thought, I can bring that book out now. So I took another look at it, and I realized that it could do some rewriting now. I wouldn't write it the same way almost 30 years down the road. So I rewrote it, and I brought it out, and I'm very happy to finally have that out because it does very much, it's a story I always believed in. And it goes way back into the early part of my career, and it's just great now to actually get it out into readers' hands.
So the story, give us a quick synopsis. What is the basic idea of the story?
Sure. It takes place in the far future, and when there's interstellar travel and all that sort of thing. The main character is a boy named Chris Lamarck, and he's been raised by a guardian in a sort of a backwater village on a remote planet. And the only thing he has of his parents, whom he knows nothing about, is this very mysterious musical instrument, he thinks, where he just has to touch it and think at it, and it will make music. Well, his guardian is abruptly murdered. This happens very early in the book, so that's not a spoiler. And he realizes that, he has no reason to stay there. He doesn't belong on this planet. He doesn't fit in. He doesn't look like the people who live on the planet. So he heads off to the spaceport city, where he hopes to use this, obviously he thinks, off-world musical instrument. He hopes to use it to track down his real family, find out more about his parents, and maybe find some real family somewhere out in the universe. So he wants to go into space. Then he falls in with a girl named Tavera, who belongs to a spacefaring group called the Family. They're sort of like gypsies. They have ships and they trade, but they're not the big mercantile conglomerations that are doing the bulk of the trading. They're more like boutique traders, I guess, and every ship is literally family. And he ends up with the family, and he ends up getting a chance to go into space. But it turns out that his musical instrument isn't just a musical instrument. It's actually a very ancient and powerful alien artifact that's been disguised by his parents, who were archaeologists, extraterrestrial archaeologists. And there are a lot of people out there who would really like to get their hands on this thing, and now they're after him and Tavera and his instrument, which is called a touch lyre. And that's the adventure that's told as he tries to stay one step ahead of them, find out the truth about this thing, and find out more about his parents and find somewhere to belong in the galaxy.
You had mentioned that you started your own publishing company. I wanted to touch on that for a minute. I assume that you would do that similarly to musicians who start their own publishing to keep more of the money that you would get from selling a book. Is that correct?
That's part of it. Largely, it's a way to bring back work that has already been published, but for whatever reason is now out of print. So when you get the rights back, and you can bring it out again, so you can continue to have that out there for people to read. So some of what I brought out has been that. It's also a way to do things that would be very hard to find a publisher for. My first book I put out was a collection of short stories. It's hard to find somebody who will publish a collection of short stories, and I'm not particularly known as a short story writer, so I wanted to get those out there. And it's a way to publish things that are very near and dear to me. So the second thing I brought out was my grandfather-in-law's First World War memoirs. So it's just a way to have control, and I've got all these projects I'd like to get out. I'm still writing for Daw Books, one of the major New York science fiction publishers. I've written for other smaller publishers, but this is a way to keep work that is no longer available for whatever reason, publishers have gone away. I can keep it out there, and a way to bring out stuff that I would like to bring out that might be very difficult to find a home for elsewhere.
So you're only publishing your own work. You're not publishing other people's work.
That's where the anthologies come in. And my grandfather-in-law's First World War memoirs was not my work. I edited it, but it was something he had written, and I just published it.
Okay.
The only other things are these anthologies. I kickstarted one last year called Shapers of Worlds, which is it comes out of my podcast, which is The World Shapers, theworldshapers.com, where I interview other science fiction and fantasy authors about the creative process. And I was attending a convention where I heard somebody talk about kickstarting, and I thought, hey, I know some authors. I could kickstart an anthology, and I did. So the first one was first-year guests, and it was like people like John Scalzi and David Brin and Joe Haldeman and Tanya Huff, big names in the field. And then I thought, well, it worked the first year. I'll do it for my second-year guests. And now that one, Shapers of Worlds Volume 2, the original Shapers of Worlds is available everywhere right now if you'd like to get it. Shapers of Worlds Volume 2 will be coming out this fall, and it features, again, just an amazing list of authors, people like Kelly Armstrong and Tim Pratt, Garth Nix. These are, again, huge names in the field. Barbara Hambly, Carrie Vaughn, S.M. Sterling. I'm very excited about it, and I'm just finishing up the editing of it now as we record this, and it should be out along in October. So those are coming out through Shadowpaw Press. I'm the editor, and although I have a story in each one of them, they are largely other people's work. And in the future, as I continue to, once I've sort of got out the stuff I want to get out of my own, I do hope to publish other people's work as well.
What do you think about the ability for people to self-publish on Kindle versus how it used to be in the olden days when you had to submit your work and go down on your knees in one of the big 5 publishing offices and beg them to take your work? It's kind of a hit and miss. It's sort of good and bad, yeah?
Yeah, I agree. I do I'm doing some freelance editing for a self-publishing firm. So I'm editing stuff that people have decided they want to self-publish. And the first step is manuscript evaluation. And I keep running into things that I know would never have been published under the old model. I know that, I can see the problems there, and I think it's good and bad. There are certainly people who have written books that deserve to be published, and for whatever reason they can't find a way through, or they don't have time. Maybe they're 85 years old and they've written their life story, and it'll be 10 years before anybody can publish it, and they would like to get it out while they're still around to get it, published. That there's all sorts of reasons for doing it. But I do think that the negative side is that there's a lot of stuff being published that would never have been published in the past, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of bad work being published, and you have this flood of stuff that it can be hard to find the gems in. That said, you could probably say the same thing about traditional publishing. There was certainly a lot of bad stuff published through traditional publishing as well. On the plus side, some of the things I said, if you have a story that you simply can't find a traditional publisher, maybe it doesn't fit into the increasingly fewer number of major publishers that are out there, then at least there is a way to get it out there. And certainly some of those things that have been self-published or started as self-published have found their way into the greater cultural landscape, things like The Martian and stuff like that. So it's got its good and bad sides.
Yeah, that's true. And that's what I keep hearing from most people. And it's not even just books. Music, film. Actually, no, I'll take film out of that. But music, definitely, because what you've done is you've eliminated the gatekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, I think back before self-publishing, there were bad books that major publishers did publish. But I think you could at least expect mediocre. Where now you can... there is some stuff out there that I've seen that just, I mean, full of grammatical and typos. Half of it didn't even make sense when you read it, and you just wonder what these people were thinking when they put this stuff out. So there's zero gatekeeper at this point, and it's unfair, I think, to the good writers, because how do you get your head above all the muck to get seen?
Yeah, and it's also, I worry, people are reading this flood of stuff, and they become accustomed to, bad grammar and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it kind of becomes less important, I think. And it's like I don't know if dumbing down is the right word, but a kind of lowering of standards. And I know that makes me sound like an ancient old guy, which I guess I am now. But I really hate finding a typo in my own book, which you do because you never get rid of them all. It's like this ice pick sticking me and thinking, oh, I've failed, maybe 100,000 words and I find one typo, and I still feel like that's terrible.
Like the book's no good now.
Feels that way.
Well, it's interesting because history does kind of repeat itself in a funny sort of way. When Mark Twain wrote in a very way that Americans speak in that sort of cadence of the South, some people said, you know what, this isn't literature. This is, almost, and see, they didn't even have recording back then, so you couldn't say it just sounded like a recording of somebody speaking. But people were sort of baffled because of the way he wrote how people spoke in the South in the 1800s. And yet, you look at Mark Twain now, and he's probably one of the greatest writers of our last 100-some-odd years. But at the time, people weren't quite sure what to do with it. So one could make that argument now that, why do we have to follow grammatical rules? Why do we have to follow all this stuff? It's free expression. And, it's up to the old people to to sort of adapt to it, to adapt to change. I mean, I've heard this argument. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm saying I've heard it. And yeah. I mean, I'm going to be 60 years old next year, so I'm no spring chicken. And sometimes it makes me think, so like, well, okay, maybe that's worth considering. But I mean, I draw the line with music because I'm a musician. And so when I hear like music that's heavily computer created, I mean, that's actually the computer is making the noise, not the manipulation of it. But then I just turn it off because it doesn't do anything for me.
I think on the writing side, the one, and my answer to, why does grammar and spelling and all of that matter? And to be fair, spelling didn't matter in Shakespeare's days.
Well, yeah.
He didn't spell his own name the same way necessarily. But it does come down to communication. When you're writing, you're trying to communicate. You're trying to express ideas clearly so that somebody else can grasp what you're trying to say, or to create a particular effect in their mind. And grammatical errors actually interfere with understanding. You can easily make a grammatical error that completely changes the meaning of the sentence.
That's a good
or
point.
Punctuation error.
Yeah. Yeah, that is a good point.
That's eat grandma. You leave out the the comma, and you've got a whole different sentence. So.
Well, and I think also one of the brilliances of writing is to be able to express emotion with words by the choice of your words. Because like you said, you could write a sentence 5 different ways and convey 5 different emotional feelings associated with that sentence, depending on how good you are as a writer. What happens with something like, just as an example, a comparison. Text messaging with people, which is writing. However, there have been so many instances where the gist of what you were trying to say in the text message got lost because they didn't hear the proper inflections in your voice to be able to understand the emotion you were trying to convey. All right? But
that's where the emojis and stuff come in.
Well, that's true. Although you're never going to use an emoji in a novel, I would hope. My point is that a great writer can get all of that spot on with just the choice of his words, because you can't indicate inflection through writing, can you?
Not very much. You can use italics and a few typographical tricks like that, but it is always something to think about when you're writing, is to make sure that the context maybe is what makes sure that the way you want that line to be read comes through. It is something you have to think about all the time.
How difficult is it for you to write sarcastically?
I can write sarcastically.
Okay.
I can be sarcastic.
But how do you express that in writing so that you really convey the sarcasm?
It's usually in the context, I guess. I mean, you can also, of course, simply say, he said sarcastically. That's kind of the easy way out.
Well, that's the easy way out. Yeah, that's like screenwriter.
But if it's in context and you have a well-established character, it has to be a character that your readers know is likely to say something sarcastic. And
then it's assumed that the character said it sarcastic.
And you can do that, or the reaction of the other character to what has been said can demonstrate that what was just said was said sarcastically, because the person who heard it within the story interpreted it as being sarcastic. Even though the words on the page are neutral, the reaction to it tells you how the line was said. All that stuff comes together. It all comes to trying to create a living moment on the page with words that the reader can put themselves into and have a feel for the scene as you would like it to be presented.
Right. The reason I said sarcastic was because that's one of the most difficult ones I've found when text messaging people. When you start getting into a longer conversation on text messaging, sarcasms tend to get lost, and they need us. You were talking about emojis. They need a sarcasm emoji. And I don't know what that would look like, but whoever could come up with that, I think, would make $1 million with it. Because it's something that a lot of people try to do text messaging and they fail, and the message gets misinterpreted. Anyways, conversation for another day. So we do have to wrap this up. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I do. It's just my name, edwardwillett.com. 2 T's on Willett, Willett. And I guess the other one to mention is the publishing company, which is shadowpawpress.com, named after our cat. He's a black Siberian named Shadowpaw.
Okay.
And then the third one is the website, the podcast, which is theworldshapers.com. So edwardwillett.com, shadowpawpress.com, and theworldshapers.com are my three of my websites. I actually have others, but those are the main ones.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show again. Best of luck with everything you're doing.
Thank